Good morning, One World. Give yourself a round of applause.
Good morning.
All right, so
Good morning.
first with the political announcements, what we got to do is we're going to be recording this video. So if you don't want anybody to know you were here, good morning, David from Kenya, Susan from Kenya.
Good morning, Joe.
Hi, Pop from India. If you don't want anybody to know you're here, Susan from Kenya, if you don't want anybody to know you're here, now's the time to leave. We're hoping to make history today, and so thank you very much. Now, the only problem we have right now is we seem to have lost our featured speaker. But while I'm going to be calling him, basically, I'm wearing this shirt for a special reason. And the reason is I wore this shirt my first Harvard conference with Professor Reimers about 8 years ago. Hey, Professor Reimers.
You mean Fernando Reimers?
Fernando, yeah.
Yeah, he's connecting to a conference call.
Yeah, that's where we're running him where he is.
Okay, he's connecting right now.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Now we'll just can we go to my presentation now? It's 34, that top one, yeah. Yeah.
Sí, te estoy escuchando.
We got a shirt, don't we?
Yeah. Gracias.
So what I'm going to do is I'm wearing my special Harvard sweater I bought when the first time we went to Harvard with Professor Reimers some years ago. And I can't thank Professor Reimers enough for becoming part of the One World community. Can I go to the presentation now? And so basically, Jack, can you see my presentation? Oh, hold on one second. All right. Can you see it now? David, give me a thumbs up if you can see my presentation. Can you guys see it? Okay, great. All right, so let's get started. Hopefully Professor Reimers is going to be here any second. But we're here to ultimately, I see my friends Jack and Janine Sakara that launched One World a decade ago. And I'm hopeful you'll agree with me that One World is a decade long, it's sort of an overnight success that's 10 years in the making. So ultimately, the goal here, as is always, is to prepare global leaders of character for 21st century opportunities and challenges.
Do you know how to make it a slideshow?
Yeah, just go, yeah. Make a slideshow, please. Beautiful. And then we go to the next slide. Okay. So I want to welcome you to the One World family. As I said, it's taken us 10 years to build this global community using emerging technologies. My friend Mary, remember when we were on Skype? We had to call, the calls would break 10 different times. Our goal is to create a 21st century school. If you think about it, a school is really a learning community. We want to create a 21st century school, a learning community without walls. We think that this gathering here today is essential to preparing students for the 21st century. So our goal today is simple: to continue to build community across the world. All right, Charlie doesn't want to go. So this is the agenda for today's meeting. Hopefully Professor Reimers is showing up.
I'm here.
Oh, good.
Can you hear me? I've been listening to you.
Oh, good, good. Thank you, Professor Reimers. I'm about to give it to you. I know everybody wants to hear from you. I'm going to hog the stage for just 3 minutes more, and then we'll introduce. And again, Professor Reimers, I want to thank you. I wore this shirt and bought this sweater 8 years ago when I went to your think tank, and I want to thank you for bringing the think tank to us first in Portchester in 2019. A number of people here today were with us then, and today again virtually. So today you've asked you to talk about the 5 principles needed to educate for rapid technological change. And I understand you're going to talk about the latest UNESCO report and some recent publications. In the last 90 minutes, we're going to introduce 6 potential communities of learning for you. And we're going to give you a choice to think about which ones you want to join. So today we're simply going to introduce the idea, 12 minutes for each community of learning. We're calling them COPEs. And then starting tomorrow, the real work begins. And each of the 6 strands of people are going to work from December 8th to December 21st to ideate, recruit, and finalize. Please mute your phones. Okay. Please be sure to mute your phones if you're not talking. And then this project, Dr. Reimers has agreed to meet with us a second time to review the projects that we develop on June 3rd of next year. Oh, now we want to generate a conversation. We're going to generate a conversation by Slack. This is our technology guru. Would you explain to them what they need to do, Charlie?
Yeah, absolutely. So we put down a link in the chat box to inviting everybody to a Slack workspace. So if you're not familiar with Slack, it's kind of like a social network. It's kind of like a Facebook for communities, for people to want to come together and talk about particular things. So in that Slack, we've created a Slack workspace for One World. And in there, you're going to see channels pertaining to the different topics, one of the 6 topics that we're going to be talking about during today. So if you click on the link, go through the sign up process, and then we'll be able to communicate over Slack.
And don't worry, if you don't get it today, if you're like me, technologically non-proficient, this is something we'll use from December 8th to December 21st. We're just introducing it today, but don't worry if you don't get it. Okay, so this is One World view of the world. Basically, we think educators are met with 2 twin challenges, which for me created a bit of a conundrum. We're moving from a local to global world and a world of linear to exponential technological change. Those are the 2 challenges we think educators face. There's a wonderful YouTube video there by Peter Diamandis I recommend you look at. Professor Reimers has told us as far back as 2009 that we're all global citizens. And those who are educated to understand global competence can have the potential to turn it into a competitive advantage. And those who are not will be left behind. Jeffrey Sachs took it one step further. He said the defining challenge of the 21st century is to recognize we share a common fate on a crowded planet. Klaus Schwab, founder of Davos, wrote a book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. He says technology is the defining challenge. And this is what led to my dilemma and conundrum. Which is it? When I make a presentation, is the defining challenge rapid technological change? Or is it to recognize we share a common fate on a crowded planet? Professor Reimers resolved my conundrum. Professor Reimers resolved my dilemma with his article, Educating for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. There is no twin challenge. There's a single uniform challenge. We need to understand and shape the technology revolution, yes, but the only way to do that is to educate global citizens. So Professor Reimers, with no further ado, let me turn it over to you.
There you go. You had muted everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe. It is such a pleasure to be with all of you today at this gathering. I so admire what you have built with this community, Joe, which is now a virtual community appropriately in many ways to the fourth industrial revolution. I think we all, I don't mean to be glib about it, but we should all thank the pandemic for giving us the opportunity, giving us the occasion to learn to do things in different ways. And having moved to virtual has all kinds of advantages. I know we will miss the opportunity to share meals and so on as we had in the past, but now this makes for a much more inclusive community where people don't need to abandon their workplaces in order to join this great gathering. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share some thoughts so we can have a conversation, and I would like to be able to share my screen. So let me see if I can do that. I think I have that facility enabled. Are you able to see my screen at the moment?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Yep.
Great. Now let's see if you can see it on, there you go. Now you see it on presentation mode, correct?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about, obviously, the current moment, the aftermath of the current moment, and the topic of this community, which is educating global citizens. And I'm going to basically tell you what the punchline is. I hope you all had a chance to read that article, which I have placed a link on the chat to that article. I'm going to talk about 5 ideas, and then I'm going to come back to those 5 ideas. And the 5 ideas are those presented in the article. But before I talk about the 5 ideas, the foundational idea is, how do we empower students for the time we live in? The education that empowers students is an education that is both authentic and relevant. Authentic means that it connects to issues in the world and that students understand the significance of what they're learning for the world they're living in. Students are smart. When they see that what happens in school bears no connection to their lives or to the world around them, they check out. They check out in different ways. And relevant means that what they're learning connects to things that they value. And so how do we do that? Is really our challenge. How do we design an education that is authentic and that is relevant? And I suggest in that article that there are 5 interlocking steps that can help us do that. The first one is start with the end in mind. Ask ourselves, what are the competencies that we want our students to gain, and connect those competencies to a vision of the world that is worth hoping for. Number 2, don't do that alone. Recognize the power of working with others. Recognize that too often we expect a school, we expect a teacher to do things they cannot do. Come on. The notion that a single teacher in her classroom can design the best climate change curriculum, when we know that the science of climate change is advancing all the time in physics departments, in chemistry departments, in universities, makes no sense. What we need is to find a way to connect what goes on in the classroom with what goes on in the labs where that science is being conducted. And one way to do that is to change the unit of analysis from the classroom, from the school, to the network of schools, and then augment the capacity of that network with institutions like universities. So that's the second principle. Don't try to solve problems at a scale where they cannot be solved. The mental model of a teacher by herself, by himself, like Atlas, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders is ridiculous. It's not going to get us very far. Number 3, don't sit there contemplating the challenge of how to provide an education that is authentic and relevant to the students. Start doing and learn from that. Learn from reflection on action, and incidentally, use the same principle to empower students. Give them opportunities every day to learn from reflection on action. Let's educate people who have an inclination to doing, to seeing themselves on the arena, as opposed to educating people who are better at contemplating the world, being bystanders than being doers. 4th principle is about the power of a problem-based education for students. In fact, I know of no other way to provide an education that is authentic and relevant. And finally, let's leverage the power of diversity of all kinds: cultural diversity, racial diversity, religious diversity, nationality diversity, ideological diversity. That's where creativity comes from, not from working with people who see the world like yourselves. I fear sometimes that education is becoming a little bit like religion, with camps here, camps there, who only talk to each other, further disaggregating, further fragmenting the community. We're not going to be able to accomplish anything great in that way. So let me then talk about how this pandemic gives us an opportunity to apply these principles. Start with the end in mind, leverage the power of networks, learn by doing, implement a problem-based education, and leverage the power of diverse teams. 4 weeks ago, UNESCO released this report. I've placed the link on the chat. In its entire history, almost 80 years right now, UNESCO has thrice put together an independent commission. These are people who work in education, but who do not work for UNESCO, and has asked them, has given them the task, give us a vision of where the world is going and what education should, what kind of education should help us prepare students for that world. And the first time that UNESCO, this is the commission, was chaired by the president of Ethiopia, the one in the front, right there in front of me. And it included people from different countries, from different backgrounds. It included teachers, it included people with education policy experience, it included business leaders, it included political leaders, included university presidents, and included former ministers of education, and so on. So, as I was saying, UNESCO has thrice in its history put together a commission like that. The first time in 1968, when it asked the then Minister of Education, Edgar Faure, to chair a 7-person commission that basically came forth with the powerful idea that education had to prepare people to learn throughout their lives. And they published a report in 1972. The title of the report is Learning to Be. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. The second time UNESCO did that was in 1992, when it asked former chairman of the European Commission, Jacques Delors, to chair a 14-person commission and gave him a similar task. And they came up with a report, Learning the Treasure Within. A big idea in that report was education is not just about developing one set of competencies, it's about developing 4 interrelated set of competencies: knowledge, cognitive skills, procedural knowledge, capacity to solve problems, skills, self-knowledge, character, and the capacity to work with others in a world that is increasingly diverse. So in 2019, at the General Assembly of the UN, UNESCO announced this 3rd commission, of which I was a member. And we really held our first meeting only in January of 2020 in Paris. And we planned 2.5 years of work to produce this report. By then, the coronavirus has started. We were reading about it in the news, but none of us really had any idea of how this was going to change our life. In March of 2020, when the World Health Organization declared COVID a pandemic, we convened in emergency session and we said, what do we do? And they said, well, the first thing we need to do is we need to issue a statement on education in this context, which we did. The link that I sent you takes you to the website of the Commission. So we put out the very first statement on the need to continue education, how wrong it would be to stop education during this crisis, because we anticipated that this crisis was not going to be a short break of 2 weeks or a few weeks, that this was going to be a couple of years, perhaps. So, but the second thing we had to decide was, do we continue producing the report, or do we put a break until we return to some normality? And we decided to continue the report. And there is no question in my mind that the report we wrote is very much shaped by the moment that we're living in. I mean, for one, we had to do all of our work virtually, just like we're meeting today. We managed, though, to listen to about 1 million people, thanks to technology. I don't know that we would have tried, different ways, right, for surveys and so on, but I don't know that we would have made such an effort to hear from so many people, teachers, students, and so on, if we hadn't been in a pandemic, and if we had been able to do as we had planned, travel around the world, hold meetings, hold seminars, working sessions, as the previous 2 commissions had done. So there is an interesting parable, I suppose, here, which is that the pandemic taught us we couldn't do what we had planned, forced us to do something different. And then we discovered that with technology, to some extent, we could do better. We could hear more voices. Now, in what ways is this report different to the previous 2 reports? And these 2 may be a result of the fact that we wrote this report in the pandemic. The previous 2 reports are written very much in a tone that says, this is the final word of the Commission. This is what you, governments, should do. They are addressed to governments, and they're presented as more or less finished pieces. This report is very different. It is not addressed principally to governments. It's addressed to you. It's addressed to teachers, to administrators, to students, to parents, to people like Joe, to ordinary citizens. And it basically says, look, if the culture of education is going to change around the world, in a world of 8 billion people, that has little to do with what governments choose to do, and a lot more to do with what each and every one of us does. And so the report begins with an invitation to each and every one of you to read the report, to get together with your colleagues in your classroom, in your school, in your district, and to ask, what do these ideas mean for us? How do they resonate with us? How do they resonate with our reality? And what are we going to do next, tomorrow, Monday morning? And so the premise of this report is that the change in the culture of education is going to be the result of a co-construction of education communities around the world as they engage with the ideas in the report. And that's why I wanted to talk to this community of One World about this report, because this is the kind of community the Commission we had in mind when we envisioned what would it take to actually change education. What it would take is communities to engage with these ideas, as you're going to do throughout the week that Joe has planned for you, Joe and his colleagues, and ask yourselves, what are we going to do differently? The second way in which this
Professor
report,
Reimers?
yes.
Yes, I apologize. We're having one technical problem.
What is it?
We increased our capacity to 600. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have taken. Didn't carry over. So our technician's gonna, and also Lark and Annie, we know you're in the wrong translation room. So this is what happens when you live in a 21st century world. While we're fixing this, I guess you can continue to talk, but I just want to do, can we continue, Charlie, or what do we need to do?
No, either potentially we have to stop the meeting and carry over and convert this into a webinar. If we can't edit,
So what do I have?
we're gonna have to stop the meeting and then I
What does that mean, stop?
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yep.
Why don't you continue the meeting and broadcast it on Facebook? And then those people who cannot be in the meeting can listen to the meeting on Facebook. Does that work for you?
Yes. Joe, we can live on YouTube also. No need to
What, sorry, who is that?
Vaibhav from India.
Okay, and so.
So we can make a live on YouTube also without any disturbance.
Okay, can you help us do that? Can you help us do that?
1 minute, yeah, I can do
But do
that.
you have a way to communicate to the remaining people so they can view it there?
Yes, yeah. I can, yeah. So who was gonna get us, can you do about this YouTube video that get live?
no, I don't, but I guess he's gonna tell
Or-
us how to do it.
Sorry, so who was that helping us get? to
Why don't
YouTube?
I stop my screen? I can come
Yeah.
back to it so we can see each other. Yeah. That's
So who-
fine. This is one of the lessons of the
This is
pandemic.
one
Is
of
we
the
all have to
lessons
be
of
flexible and
technology.
nimble. Not a
Exactly.
problem.
So, sorry, who was that helping us with live YouTube?
I'm about to work at it right now. Sign into Zoom, quick settings.
I mean, if you have other solution that you know how to work, maybe stick to that
Yeah,
plan.
we're just trying it right now. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't, Professor Reimers, you can continue, right? Let me just, how do I mute everybody? And
Actually, Joe,
Yep,
this version which you purchase, it is not allowed to live on Facebook and YouTube. If you can be a host or co-host, I will check it in the setting, because now I am only attending.
so what do I need to do? Make you co-host?
You can make me co-host, then I will check it
All
with
right,
the
Vaibhav,
setting.
Vaibhav, you're now co-host.
Okay, 1 minute.
All right.
And then Viba, you can give them the link, right, to the YouTube so that they can share it.
Sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And so the people that you're trying to get in missed what I said, correct?
Well, they were coming in late, so we don't have to, I mean, and I pick up the 5 principles. I think you can pick up from where you are, and we have the recording. So the good news is being recorded. So I think there's no need for you to go back, Professor Reimers. So hopefully, okay, while we're waiting, maybe I'll describe what we're going to be doing for the rest of the meeting. And hold on, let's see if we have one more problem. What's up, Anna?
Hi, can I just switch with Javier for a little bit just to give my voice a break?
Yep, sure. Well, hold on. No, let's do one thing at a time. Not yet. Let's get one thing started at a time. All right. 1 second, Anna. Let me just hold on for 1 second. So ultimately, what we're going to do from here, again, we have 6 communities of learning. In fact, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to anticipate.
Sí, sí te escucho.
I'm gonna anticipate the next part of our program, so that we can you know,
Okay,
save
perfect.
some time. We're going to be together for 2.5 hours. Hopefully, Vipov and Charlie are going to solve this problem in the next 3 or 4 minutes. Paul, sorry to cut you off, Fernando, Professor Reimers.
No. This is actually good. I mean, think about it. The good news is you have 500 more people who are going to be part of the conversation. And technology allows us to do this in relatively short period of time. That is amazing. Imagine if you had an in-person meeting, right, in Connecticut, and all of a sudden 500 people tell you, we want to join you from all over the world. You would have said, are you dreaming? That's not possible. And right now it is possible. And not only that, not only are you going to get those 500 people to be with us, you're going to open this up to the world. Everybody here can tweet it to their friends. So 500 can become 5,000. So that is exactly, those are exactly the ideas that the commission had in mind when it framed the report in that way. The ideas are that we live in a world where the old structures and processes and ways of thinking about how to do things, what some people define as old power, are no longer useful. And we need to replace them with new power. And new power is exactly about the flexibility that you're modeling. If we had tried to plan an object lesson, a class to illustrate the moment we're living in, we couldn't have done it better. I'm actually glad this is happening. It's an example. It's not testing you, Joe, as to whether you are a leader of the 21st century. It's giving all of us an opportunity to realize, wow, look at what we can do in real time, right? And I think that to some extent, the pandemic helped us develop those muscles. I don't know that in February of 2020, we would have been so cool had something like this happened. So this, I mean, look at what happened here, right? You had a problem, and instead of keeping it to yourself, you share it with the community. That's good leadership, right? Old power would have said, no, Joe doesn't tell anybody this is happening. And then one member of the community stepped up and said, I can help you solve it. That's a powerful idea, right? In the 21st century, good ideas can come from anywhere. And good leaders have no problem recognizing that. Joe has no problem saying, guys, I have a problem here. I'm not sure how we're going to solve it, because it is that vulnerability that makes it possible for people to help you. If you were stuck in an old power paradigm and you had kept the problem to yourself, we wouldn't have solved it. So this is all good. This is all phenomenal.
It's supposed to show up here live on YouTube.
Are you doing YouTube, or is that what you're doing? Or what?
Well, yeah, YouTube's live on YouTube.
Well, let's just say, okay, Vipov.
Vipov, I've enabled live on YouTube, live on Facebook, but it's not showing up in the more. It should be popping up on where to copy that link or where to send people to.
Do you see that, Vipov? Vipov, do you have a solution for us?
Yeah, there is no more option actually. I'm trying to find it. Where is the more option? Because
yeah, we have the same issue. I don't see on my screen more. There is usually an icon at the bottom.
Professor, it is only visible to host, who is the host, who can, who can see the more option.
But are you a host? Are you a host?
I am the co-host.
So maybe the host needs to do this, or they can make you a host for a moment, and then you can return that. Why don't you make him a host?
The last thing to do is end it and then have him come right back.
Can you make me host, please? Joe?
Can you make him host?
Yep.
Yeah. Give him a shot.
Hold on 1 second. Okay, Vipov, you're now the host.
Okay, 1 minute only.
And all right, so I'm gonna, I think, I still have the capacity to share my screen. Or actually, Professor Reimers, you want to, once you continue your talk, hopefully solve it. Otherwise, we're just gonna,
No, it's solved. Vipod is gonna solve it. We've solved it together. Relax.
Fantastic.
It's fine.
Yeah, so if you want to continue the presentation.
So Professor Reimers, you can continue to present in any case while we're waiting for VIPOP to solve it.
Yeah, Professor, please continue. Yeah, I'm not ready to disturb you. Please continue. This is the important for us. Please
You're not
continue. I
able
will
to.
make
You're
it.
not able to put it on YouTube.
At my level, I've been trying to do, but we are eager to listen you, and we don't want to disturb to others.
I think
So
let's
please,
just
you continue, sir.
Okay, I'm happy to do that, but then
Yep.
I'm going to share my screen. Is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, now,
All right. So let's just give me a moment. Let me just find my slides. Can you see my slides right now?
Yep.
yes, yes, yes.
Well, so as I was saying a moment ago, before we took that break, this report just released by UNESCO on the futures of education differs from the previous two reports that UNESCO has produced on the topic in a number of ways. Number one, it is presented as an invitation to each and every one of you to co-construct with the Commission the implication of these ideas about the future for your schools. So I'm here inviting all of you to download this report, to get to read it, to get together with your colleagues and to discuss, so how do these ideas resonate with our reality? What are we going to do differently in our school? Or even better, what are we already doing in our school, in our district, that is aligned with this report? And what else can we do to challenge ourselves? The second way in which this report differs from the other two, oops, I'm trying to, there you go, is that it's very much, it gets into the nitty-gritty of education. The other two reports were written very much at 30,000 feet. And this report gets to talk about pedagogy. I have placed here a link to a publication. I'm going to send you the link on the chat. Let me see if I can do it now. Yeah, here it is. Here's the link. Oh, I couldn't do it. I'm sorry. But if you I'll find you a link to this publication that talks about how do you produce transformational education for low-income students. And it's all about how to do an education that is authentic and that is relevant. That's what this report is about. So the report basically is built on three premises. Everyone is a change maker. It is completely anchored on human rights in much clearer ways than the previous two reports. It says the same things that I say in that article that Joe sent you on the fourth industrial revolution. Look, human rights are a great invention. The notion that every person has agency and the capacity to take charge of their lives. Let's make that the guiding principle of education. And it's anchored on authentic and relevant learning. And then the report talks about, so how do we change pedagogy? Talks about a pedagogy of solidarity. How do we change curriculum? How do we open the doors and the windows of the school to the world? How do we change the very organization of the school so that the school is not just the individuals that are inside the building, but connects, for example, to communities such as One World? How do we reimagine the teaching profession so that we no longer have this mental model of the teacher carrying the world on her shoulders like Hercules, like Atlas? And finally, how do we build a learning ecosystem that makes it possible for people to learn throughout their lives, just like you're all learning because you're members of this community? How do we make that possible to everybody? These are the key ideas. I hope you will read the report. So let me now come back to the current moment and what the current moment means for those ideas. And I'm going to tell you a tale, which could be titled, There Are Prophets in This World, and They May Even Be Your Friends. So back in February of 2020, I'm having a conversation with a dear colleague, professor of public health. His name is Rifat Atun. And I'm excited that I'm going to be in Mexico because I'm going to be launching a new book on educating global citizens. And he says, you're not going to be anywhere in Mexico. And you're not going to be able to travel anywhere in a year or two. And I say, why? He says, because this virus is going to spread and it will become a pandemic. And airplanes and airports are really bad places to be during a pandemic. So I went to my office after I had this chat with Rifat, went online and I thought, oh my God. And then I said, what's going to happen to my book? What's going to happen to my students? What's going to happen to my research? What's going to happen to education around the world? And so I began on the last issue I reached out to some friends in various organizations. I said, look, I've just realized that this is going to be a hell of a time for education. Is there something we can do to be helpful? And one person who responded right away, this was the book I was going to present. I did publish the book, by the way. The end of that story was much better than I had envisioned. Yeah, I wasn't able to launch the book in Mexico. I launched it online. To date, 170,000 people have downloaded the book. In my wildest dreams, I would not have imagined that in the middle of a pandemic, 170,000 people would be interested in educating global citizens. But anyway, that's just a footnote. So March happens, and the person who had responded to me was the director of education of the OECD, Andrea Schleicher. He said, what do you think we should do? I said, well, I don't know. Let's do a survey. Let's do a survey to education authorities, asking them, how is this going to impact you and what do you need? And so we designed the survey. The March 11th, the World Health Organization declares this a pandemic. We launched the survey, and then we realized nobody had a plan. So we said, why don't we give them a checklist? Why don't we basically say everyone should have a plan to continue to educate? It's unacceptable to just stay put. And these are 25 things you should think about. Well, that checklist has become a bestseller. In less than 2 years, it is now the most cited thing that I've ever written in my life. People keep citing it and using it. We put it out in several languages. It's an example of how unexpected situations give you an opportunity where you have the disposition to be helpful. You may end up doing a lot more good than you would have otherwise. And that is the opportunity each and every one of us has in this moment. And that is also the opportunity that each and every one of our students has at the moment. Anyway, I realized that just talking about, the basic news is that nobody had a plan and everybody anticipated a calamity that was going to happen. So we said, let's spotlight good things that are happening. Let's spotlight good efforts. And we documented in a period of 3 months, 45 case studies. The OECD is now going to publish a book with all these case studies because both, it does have some historical value. These were the innovations that were created the first 3 months of the pandemic. But also it's a remarkable story of how in the middle of these very difficult circumstances, very ingenious, very innovative things happen. If you're curious, you can go to this website and look at them to realize that these things were done in a matter of weeks, creating entirely new alternative education delivery systems is mind-boggling. And then that work helped me understand how important leadership was. The commentary I was making on Joe's leadership in being flexible and making himself vulnerable actually is an observation that I realized as I wrote these 45 case studies. And I realized that we had to put the topic of leadership on the agenda. And so with collaborators, I wrote 3 books on leadership during COVID, which basically had the goal of causing people to think that in how they led was the crux of how this pandemic was going to impact children, and that we had a choice. Well, more recently, with my colleague Renato Operti from UNESCO, we went back, and this was like 6 months ago. We said, let's look at everything that happened during the pandemic that was good, and let's look for those innovations that are completely in tune with this vision of the futures of education presented in this document. And we published this thing. It's a free book. You can download it on this link. But the whole point, there are 31 innovations here. The whole point is not just to say, look at these great 31 things that happen around the world. New ways to communicate with parents, new ways to promote social emotional development, new ways to develop global competencies of the kids. The basic message of this book is each of you should be doing the same thing. Each of you should be looking back at the last 2 years and asking, what happened in our district that was good? We know that tons of things happened that were not good, but what happened that was good? And what is it that we can learn from what happened that would have value for the future? Because the pandemic basically was a moment in which the normal rule over the last 2 years, I spent a lot of time looking at the impact of the pandemic, realized that leadership was very important, but also more recently realized that good things had taken place, good innovations had happened that were fully in line. So this report both contains a record of innovations that happened during the pandemic, which I hope you'll find inspiring, but more importantly, is meant to convey the message that each and every one of us should be at this time looking back at things that we did differently, innovations that took place that actually have potential for the world going forward. And I really invite all of you to do that examination in your practice, in your classroom, in your leadership practice, in your school, in your district, and to investigate, okay, what did we learn that is relevant for the education of the 21st century? These are two books that talk about the yin and yang and the pandemic. The book on the left is an analysis of the impact of this pandemic in 13 different countries around the world, including the US. The story is not a single story. Obviously, there was a lot of loss, a lot of challenges, but also where good choices were made, good things happen. The book on the right-hand side is an example of the kinds of innovation I was talking about earlier. And these are collaborations between universities and schools that were created during the pandemic for the purpose of helping networks of schools and school districts cope better, innovate, and continue to educate during the pandemic. One of my conclusions is that for all the loss created by the pandemic, there are also some dividends. I call them innovation dividends, and they are the ones that are on the screen. We all now realize the importance of educating the whole child. We all have much greater appreciation for science and technology. We all now have much greater appreciation of the potential of the technologies that we're using today, but also greater humility on our own shortcomings in using them, and more awareness of the need to invest in building our own capacity to make the full use, to realize the full potential of these technologies. We all understand how important it is to have good communications between schools and homes, greater appreciation of society for education. We understood how powerful collaboration is. And in that sense, the basic premise of the One World Network as a platform to allow collaboration, I think becomes even more visible at this time, because we've all seen that when good things happen in the pandemic is because teachers were not alone, left to their own devices, but they were part of networks with others in their schools, in their districts, in other communities that could learn from one another. And we're going to see much greater reliance on partnerships. This recent publication I wrote at the request of both UNESCO and the International Academy of Education. They said, look, synthesize what you learned in the pandemic, and especially put it in a format that can help us make the best out of this time. So I titled this short publication, which you can download for free on the link below, Education and COVID, Recovering from the Shock Created by the Pandemic and Building Back Better. So I do think that at this time, there are two mental traps that we should avoid. One is the mental trap that says, well, we should just go back to schools the way they were before the pandemic, and we should recover learning loss. I think those mental traps are inadequate because the schools before the pandemic, let's face it, they had all kinds of problems. They weren't teaching all kids. They weren't teaching them what they needed. They weren't teaching them what was more relevant to the world, and they weren't teaching everybody well. Number two, recovering learning loss is going to be impossible if we simply try to repeat what we would have done, because that assumes that every kid has 2 extra years in their lives they can devote to education. Instead, what we need is to move to a framework of accelerated learning, which is very different from remedial learning. And we need to find new ways to help students gain the competencies they didn't develop, not to recover, not to go through the curriculum as was planned. So that's the design challenge. This book presents that challenge as one of reteaching the competencies that were not learned, teaching with more effectiveness during this period, which I think is a transitional period. I mean, we see with Omicron, who knows how this pandemic is going to evolve, right? And so we have to make sure that these platforms that we have are more effective, and we have to build back better. By the way, I began to talk about building back better before the president of the US made it his mantra. I endorse it, but I've been talking about building back better back since May of 2020. And have a couple of books with that title. And so I think that means we need to assess how the context has changed. We need to develop a strategy to teach during the outbreak that is basically a blended strategy. And we have to increase the capacity of schools, teachers, leaders, and others during this period. Here are some specific recommendations to develop that strategy at every school, every district, and so on. And so in terms of developing a blended strategy, what does that mean? It has to be guided by the principle that no child should be left behind. We have to have a platform that includes in-person as well as online instruction, and we use the online piece for differentiation, for personalization. We need to reprioritize the curriculum focusing on competencies. We need to use an accelerated and personalized curriculum. We have to, of course, support the mental health and well-being of the students. We have to take stock of the innovations that took place during the pandemic, and we have to integrate services to provide holistic support to students. And so this report is basically an invitation for us to do all of that. This report now becomes a building block in this strategy. And so that brings me back to assessing the innovations that have taken place, but to these good old friends, the SDGs. You've heard me talk about the SDGs before, in particular 4.7. How do we prepare students with the competencies to do that? And as I mentioned in that article that Joe shared, over the last decades, I've developed 3 curriculum resources. I've talked to this group about those resources before. I know you have read them. They're available in many different languages, but I'll just briefly remind you of what these resources are. So for example, this book, you have it here in English and in Portuguese, but it's available in Spanish, in Chinese, in many other languages, was basically putting in practice these 5 principles that are in the article that you read. Begin with the end in mind. What is it that you want students to learn? Use project-based pedagogies. Give students an opportunity to learn based on reflection from practice. Focus on breadth of skills. Engage students for an extended period with challenging activities. Use themes that help them see the connections across the disciplines, that bring in new content, that cultivate dispositions such as agency, the ability, the desire to make a difference, leadership. Help students learn from what works and not to be deterred by challenges. Help them develop an innovative and entrepreneurial spirit, develop flexibility, resiliency. Engage your parents with an asset mentality as a resource. Emphasize higher order skills. Keep going back to the SDGs and human rights as the focus. By the way, this coming Friday is International Human Rights Day. Very important day. A great opportunity for each and every one of you to make sure that everyone in your schools, every student knows what human rights are and engages in activities where they look at what's the state of human rights around it. What can you do in the schools so that students learn to live in a culture, are participants in building a culture where human rights are a reality for us. Anyway, so these were the principles of the World Course. Essentially, the big idea here was we need to provide an instrument and a language and a protocol to make it possible for every educator to test the 2 hypotheses on which any curriculum is based. If our students gain competencies A, B, and C, the consequences to themselves and to the world will be the following: a world that is more inclusive, a world where we all belong, a world in which we relate to one another without violence, the kind of world we're going to be discussing in these in these sessions that are forthcoming, 20 minutes apiece. And then in order for our students to gain those competencies, what are the learning experiences we need to provide for them? What are these learning opportunities that are both authentic and relevant? So anyway, the 60 Lessons book, which you can download in the link that is placed at the bottom of the screen here, was a simplified way to do the World Course. And I know many of you have used this tool, which is basically a protocol, a checklist to help you adapt the SDGs to a learning framework, a framework of a graduate. It's also a protocol to help you develop a strategy in your school. I know Joe was really excited by these, and he developed his own simplified version of this 13-step protocol. And then it's an example, 60 lessons, right? So what are the 13 steps? Someone has to be in charge. Those of you at this meeting have to be in charge. You need to study the SDGs and figure out what do they mean. You then need to develop this framework of what is it that you hope the students will learn and connect that with the curriculum frameworks in your districts. You then need to examine what are we doing already that is aligned with those competencies. You then need to challenge yourselves and say, what else are we going to do? That is a little challenging, but within reach. You need to communicate. You then need to figure out, okay, how are we going to execute, right? Project management. I keep this little book right here. I recommend it. The Harvard Business Review Guide to Project Management. Successful educational change is mostly about execution. It's not about great ideas. It's about executing great ideas. And simple things like a PERT chart, a Gantt chart, knowing who's in charge of what's going to happen when, they are the secret to success. Then you need to figure out what resources do you need. Then you need to have a dashboard, a framework that can help you keep track of what's happening. Then you communicate again to all the relevant stakeholders. You need to figure out what is it that teachers need to learn, what skills they need to, and then you need to execute, basically. Stop contemplating the problem, act, and then learn from what you did, and then do it again the next year. And then if you do that, you basically have an improvement cycle. But because you have followed a protocol, a language, some tools that help you make visible what you learn, now you can test these two key hypotheses. If I teach A, students will learn B, and if they learn B, the consequence will be D in the company of others. So you then have an improvement network. And that's always been my hope for what the One World is. It's an improvement network. You can do that. This is within reach for all of you. You are a community that could be doing these experiments. That's what we tried to do when we met in person the last time in Connecticut before the pandemic, to get you organized into these learning communities. And that is what I hope is going to happen as a result of this convening this week, this time around. Well, lastly, let me just share the 5 ideas in this book. What are the 5 ideas? 5 ideas are that if you are trying to produce change at scale, you need to be able to communicate with others. And to communicate with others, you have to get inside their heads. And you can't assume that they see the process of change the way you do. And so what I argue in this book, this is, by the way, the book I was going to launch in Mexico. And here's the link. This is the book that has been downloaded now 170,000 times. And what I argue here is that there are at least 5 ways to see the process of change. And that if we have the capacity, the flexibility to see it simultaneously from those 5 frames, we're going to be more effective. Like a kaleidoscope, you can see many more shapes, many more colors, because you have different colors there. What are those frames? Cultural, psychological, professional, institutional, political. What the book does is basically uses each of these frames to review a lot of existing literature, a lot of examples on how to do global citizenship. So I hope you'll be curious to read the book if you haven't done that already. The perspectives are basically a cultural frame says, look, this school doesn't work in a vacuum. It works in a community. It has to interact with families, with communities, with your school board, with a range of stakeholders. So you better have good communication. And you better use the best knowledge about how students learn, how they develop resiliency, and how they become open-minded and so on. That's a psychological perspective. And you also have to make sure that the practice of these is based on expert knowledge. What I've tried to create with these tools to facilitate the creation of improvement networks is the development of professional knowledge that guides this practice. And an institutional perspective says, look, an education system is a set of gears and pulleys, and they're all connected to one another, and you need to make sure there is coherence. And a political perspective basically says, look, a lot of people care about what happens in schools, and it's important to at least listen. Now, there's a complicated thing in the US because I think our schools are becoming as fragmented as the rest of the society, so our politics maybe are doomed. Anyway, this book says it's all about execution, it's about implementation. You have here a series of case studies, national case studies, that implemented reforms to prepare students for the 21st century that are happening as we speak. We completed this study just before the pandemic started. And then we published it in the middle of the pandemic, and that's why we subtitled it Building an Educational Renaissance After the Pandemic. And the key lessons in that book are mindsets about reform are very important. These mental models, the 5 frames I just presented. You need operational clarity. You need execution. It's important to have coherence, completeness. You need to sequence, can't do everything at the same time. But you also have to stay the course. You have to build system level capacity. And to do that, nothing is more important than preparing your teachers. These 2 resources give you lots of ideas on how to do that. One on the right-hand side can be downloaded for free. And so let me conclude where I began, which is with these very simple 5 ideas that says, how are we going to prepare students for the future? If we start with the end in mind, the end in mind is what do we want them to learn? If we don't do this alone, but empowered by improvement networks such as the One World community, if we don't sit there hoping to have perfect clarity, but we actually start on the journey and let the journey inform us. If we create opportunities for authentic and relevant learning that leverage the power of a problem-based education, and if we learn how to build on the power of collaborating in diverse teams. That's all I wanted to share. I apologize because we had a couple of interruptions, but I hope you'll be forgiving. You know, this is life in the 21st century. Over to you, Joe.
Dr. Reimers, thank you so much. Again, apologies for the confusion. Again, that is,
Vaibhav wants to say something. I don't know whether this is technical or
Who
on
is
the
that?
subject. Vaibhav Jadhav, who was helping us, he has raised his hand.
all
So
right.
I think you need to let him speak because
Yep.
I think now the participants cannot speak unless you authorize them.
Correct. Vaibhav. Well, okay, Vaibhav, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It is a great pleasure. First, I would like to express my thanks to Joe because introducing to Professor Reimers to us, and great evening in India today. We listen to you. I would like to share one thing that the learning loss,
I get it.
Jim Premji University in India,
Okay.
and we have published one report. Sir, I would like to share one thing and how we could over it. 92% students from the primary section lost their one language ability in India due to the pandemic, because we have a 3-language formula in India, and because of this pandemic we work on it. 92% students maybe lost their one language ability, and near about 82% primary students lost their mathematical ability. So, Professor, it is difficult challenge in front of us as a teacher educator, how we can make it more easy in front of coming years.
Yeah, I mean, not only did they lose that, there are countries where the financial impact of the pandemic has caused parents to pull the children of low-cost private schools, send them to public schools. These public schools are now overcrowded. The kids have been out of school for a long time, and the parents and the teachers are not treating the children very well because they're overwhelmed. So I'm very aware of some of the challenges. My recommendation is that you begin with the guide that I share, and I'm going to try to place a link to that guide again here on the chat, because there are colleagues actually in India that have taken that guide and used it to develop an operational framework to help them recover their schools. And I think that there are two of the resources that I share today may be useful to you. One is that guide, and I'm placing the guide just now on the chat room. And the other one is the UNESCO publication, because that publication has actually lots of examples from India on the use of various low-cost technologies to leverage the power and to leverage the power of families and to engage families as partners in the task of helping their students recover what they haven't learned. But look, there is no denying that this has been a time of loss and of serious problems that are still ongoing. And we cannot wish those away. The only choice we have is, what are we going to do about them? And I've offered you on the chat 2 resources that give you specific guidance on what you could do with your colleagues. So I think the book from UNESCO, Learning, Building Back Better Futures, you will see in it, in these 35 case studies, many examples specifically from India on how to use these low-cost technologies to augment learning opportunity for students. Joe,
Wonderful.
but I interrupted you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. Thank you very much, Professor Reimers. Thank you, Vaibhav. So listen, again, we have a packed agenda, so I'm going to get right into it. If you need to use the restroom, whatever, go for it. We're going to be applying these 5 principles to the community, our communities of learning and practice. Sorry, Charlie, would you? And so first question, start with the end in mind, educate for global citizenship. Next thing is leverage our professional and collective intelligence. Leverage our collective intelligence. Next. Obviously, learn by doing. My good friend, Dr. Ferrara says, where's the data? There is no data. We got to create the data. A continuous large laboratory of experimentation. Next. Just do it, man, please.
Yeah, right there.
And finally, let's get the kids involved. Every One World Club does service learning, project-based learning. Get the kids involved. They know how to use technology better than we do. The world's upside down. For the first time in the history of humanity, the most powerful tool on the planet Earth can be used better by our youth and us. Next. And finally, the power of collaboration in diverse teams. This is the most important one, according to Dr. Reimers. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. And that's what we're going to do right now. Next. So ultimately, we have 6 broad topics we're going to talk about. We've created 6 teams. We're going to allocate about 10 minutes to each team. And Professor Reimers has kindly agreed to kick off the first conversation and generate the first. Now, Professor Reimers, I'm afraid we're going to have a little bit of difficulty bringing people into the conversation. I guess you're going to have to raise your hand because we're in webinar mode now. So if you want to talk webinar mode, we'll go to the first, future Education. So, oh yes, I'm going to talk about the structure a little bit. So again, what's really, really important today, especially in today's technology snafu, the real work starts tomorrow. Shaping each of these 6 communities of learning and practice is going to take place from December 8th to December 21st. We've identified some leaders for each topic. And in addition to that, please volunteer for your program and topics. Okay. We're going to have diverse team leaders, hopefully a team leader from China with Chinese speaking, Spanish speaking, and English speaking. If you want to be part of a coordinating team, just raise your hand and we're going to show you how to register later on. Each COPE will have a group of participants and every COPE will be fully supported by One World. So Professor Reimers only for today, but in terms of our partners, again, I've asked them to defer to Professor Reimers today, but Dr. Ferrara from Manhattanville will be leading this group along with Merri Pelcastre, UPN Mexico, and we're looking for a Chinese speaking expert, Lark, Madam Lynn, and Hillary. So Professor Reimers, future of education, what can we talk? Oh, and by the way, just so we know, right, so there's a learning component to everything we're going to do, and then there's an activities component to everything we're going to do. So basically, but the first one is, is the future of education. So where's education going? Where's education going to be in 2030 and 2040, Professor Reimers?
Thank you, Joe. I have just placed on the chat a link to UNESCO's report on the futures of education, which includes the full report in English and in French, but also executive summaries, very complete executive summaries in several languages, including Spanish, including Portuguese, including Chinese, including Korean. So I invite you all to go to that website and download at least the executive summary in the language that you're most familiar with. So basically what this report, I'm going to speak about that report when I talk about the future of education. The report has basically 3 parts. Part 1 says, what are the key drivers? What are the key societal drivers that we should be using to helping us think about the future? And driver number 1 is climate change. It's saying we need to better educate students to address this crisis. And you know, what's interesting is that when you look at how we are educating students for climate change, we are sometimes achieving the opposite result of what we're intending. This is a book I wrote with my students a couple of years ago on education for climate change. And what I did in that book, the first thing I did in that book was to review the evidence, the research on the effectiveness of climate change education. And you know what I found? That most of those programs had the opposite effect of that which they intended, because they produced students who were knowledgeable of climate change, but who also became so cynical that they could make any difference in climate change. Now, I found one study or a series of studies by a Swedish researcher, which she compared the following conditions. She compared a classroom where she only taught kids about the science of climate change to classrooms where, in addition to learning the science of climate change, students engage in projects that gave them an opportunity to do something about climate change. And it was only the second group, when you combine the science of climate change with project-based learning, with a civic component, that the students actually developed the hope that they could make a difference and the confidence that they actually have the skills to make a difference. So there's a very powerful lesson in there. Anyway, back to the report on the futures of education. So the drivers are climate change, social fragmentation. Social fragmentation, not only in the United States, but in many different places, there are these trends, perhaps technology, that are pulling us apart instead of pulling us together, that are getting us to live in our echo chambers, where we kind of lose the ability to communicate with those who think differently than we do, to listen to them, to develop, to identify shared interests, to develop projects that get us to work together. So that's second driver. Third driver, democratic backsliding. In democracies around the world, there are forces that are basically pulling down democracy. The Kennedy School of Government at Harvard conducted a poll among young people on the state of American democracy. And it's very concerning. More than half of them say democracy is not working very well. And similar surveys, there is a growing percentage of the population that seems to be disaffected from democracy. Now, for a world in which human rights are a reality, that is a serious problem, as serious as climate change, as serious as social fragmentation. Obviously, they're related. Third big driver, poverty and growing inequality. That is one of the things that is pulling society apart. The fact that the divisions between the haves and the have-nots are becoming very visible and perhaps growing. So the report then says, how do we respond to that? And it says we respond to it by addressing systemically 5 drivers. Number 1, pedagogy. We have to extend, most pedagogy is about building the capacities of individuals to look after themselves, to provide for themselves. The idea is you also have to prepare people to collaborate with others and to look after the common good, to improve shared communities, shared spaces of which they are a part. So there's a big emphasis on what are these pedagogies of solidarity? How do we make sure, the OECD conducted a survey 3 years ago in which they asked teachers in about 100 countries around the world what kind of pedagogies they used. And, when it came to pedagogies that involved the development of individual skills, a lot of teachers did those things, lessons and so on. But when it came, for example, to getting students to collaborate in groups, on average, across the OECD, only 30% of the teachers rely on those kinds of pedagogies. That's a serious problem. When it comes to engaging students in teamwork, where they have to themselves figure out how to solve a problem, I think it's 1 in 5 teachers did something like that. So there's a whole opportunity here in re-examining how we are teaching, not what we are teaching, how we are teaching. Second area of reform in this report is curriculum. Obviously, curriculum drives what we do in schools. And we need to have a curriculum that doesn't place children in silos. Now is the time for math. Now is the time for language. Now is the time, and not understand why am I even learning this thing, but that actually helps the students understand what's the connection across those silos and how does all of that connect to anything that I possibly care about and to anything that affects my life outside of the school. So that's the invitation to reimagine curriculum. My previous talk, I was giving you some examples of how to do that. Third driver in this report on the futures of education is we need to reimagine the organization of schools and the roles that people play. If we're actually going to do a good job developing the holistic capacity of students, we have to create new roles and we have to be comfortable with those roles. I know many schools where there are huge barriers between the community and the school. where the parents are not even allowed, where to come into the school, there are all kinds of hurdles. It's as if teachers saw the parents as the problem, instead of seeing the parents as the solution. That's the answer to the question that the participant asked me recently about India. How do we solve this problem? Find a way to engage the parents and to make them your partners. One of the most successful ministers of education that I have known was a former minister of education of New Zealand. She was a woman of Maori descent, the indigenous people of New Zealand. And in New Zealand, there's a big achievement gap between Maori children, indigenous children, and non-Maori children. So she said, I'm going to fix that gap. And here's a way in which she fixed it. It's a small country, New Zealand, limited number of schools, several hundred schools. She sent the inspectors to every school. She said, give me the list of students. Show me the children who are Maori. And they ask each child, who's the grown-up who most cares about your education? And they reached out to the person, the inspectors did, and they said, thank you for supporting this child. Is there any way we can help you do a better job? What do you need to do that? Think about what a clever way to personalize education. Now, the minister who told me that story said, by the way, in 5 years, they had just about closed that achievement gap. So in a way, what she did is she took the concept of the Harlem Children's Zone in the US, which is this elaborate mechanism to connect the education system with a bunch of social services. And she said, I don't need to build an elaborate architecture to do that. I just need to find the person who will connect those dots for the kids. And I need to see what kind of help that person needs. And then she said, the sad thing is that in most cases, the person that the children named as the person who most care about them was neither a teacher nor a parent. I mean, he talks about why is it that some kids fall through the cracks? Because the people who have the roles that we would expect that the roles who care for the kids aren't actually doing a good job. But if these kids are lucky, there is someone else who's doing that. Maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's the police officer, maybe it's someone in the community. So we have to rethink roles. We have to reimagine roles to make it possible to provide every child the support that they need to succeed. We also have to imagine the teaching profession, where we make teachers comfortable with this idea of collaboration, where we make collaboration and continuous learning part of doing your job as a teacher. Then we have to build this learning ecosystem. And the place to begin is create opportunities for parents. In many of our communities, the parents too need help. The parents have been impacted by the pandemic. I serve on the board of directors of a charter school network in the US that works with very poor kids, failing leadership academies. And one of the things we've done is we've created what we call PLA University. And what is PLA University? A series of programs to help the parents gain skills so we can find jobs. They can find jobs and better jobs and improve the circumstances of their schools. So we have to think beyond the classroom. We have to think beyond the school. We have to look at the community and say, what needs are there for learning? Who needs to learn here? And how do we create the opportunities to do that? So the views of this report on the futures of education, well, the future are those. I said the report has three pieces. The drivers, which I mentioned, climate change, social fragmentation, democratic backsliding, poverty and inequality, the elements of change, the 5 levers I mentioned. And then the report says, there are 2 things, the 2 pillars that are going to support that. One is innovation. We need a big commitment to innovation to help us do that. This is not about same old, same old. It's not about doing the things we were doing before. It's about doing new things. And each one of you is in the position of being an innovator. And the second role talks about the international development community and universities, not so relevant for our purposes. So maybe I should stop here, Joe. I don't know if people have questions.
Well,
I want to write them.
I think we're going to be what I'm going to do, we're going to be a little less interactive, and we did plan a little bit. So one of the leaders of the Spanish speaking world is Mary Pelcastri, and I'm going to share with everybody what she sent me last night. And if you know Mary, it's fairly profound and fairly dense. So what Mary wrote was, if we analyze in light of the effects of the acceleration of change imposed by technology and the first pandemic All signs seem to indicate we're turning towards a new paradigm centered on knowledge and the human capacity to learn, question, and transform its reality. Therefore, today we can recognize the existence of an educational paradox that tells us that we either mediate the technological impact for the development of good, or we face the possibility of extinction. And ultimately, in Mary's view, that is one of the fundamental questions she wants to look at. And ultimately, she sees the threat of educational singularity more present today than ever. And this acceleration is happening outside of human linear thought. And therefore, we need to think about preparing our students for 20,000 years of change. She says the opportunity to create a future education here now is the possibility of rethinking education, unlearning, and thinking outside the box of the industrial paradigm, where human and planetary sustainability is our fundamental goal, anchored in the achievement of the SDGs. Now, we're only 10 minutes each. I'm going to ask Dr. Ferrara, who's also a leader in this group, to share 1 minute. If you could unmute Dr. Ferrara, we would turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you for having me today, and I'm excited to move this forward with Mary. I'll be more of a take more of a practical approach, and I'd like to see ways that we can help empower teacher capacity and build schools' capacity to really respond to the issues that are before us right now, instead of the top-down model of education that Dr. Reimers alluded to earlier. I mean, what can we do to help school leaders, as Mary said, think outside the box and to really look at the needs of the community, look at the needs of the parents, of course, look at the needs of the whole child, and then mobilize the community to move forward, to think about a new way, as Dr. Reimers said, to reimagine education. But I think we have to build school capacity, and we have to help them be courageous to say, it's time for us to take back education. Teachers and principals know how to teach. They know children, and why don't we put the power back in their hands? So I hope that that wasn't too much of a soapbox, but certainly that's where my passion is, and helping communities really empower themselves.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Ferrara. So now we're going to move to global competence. So that was the futures of education. We're going to, again, the hard work starts tomorrow. Today, we're introducing these concepts. And if you're interested in the futures of education, Mary, who I helped translate for, and Joanne, Dr. Ferrara, we're going to be leading that group. And we're looking for a Chinese educator as well on that side. Dr. Reimers obviously is expert in global competence. So I've asked him to, again, take the lead on talking about global competence, what kind of learning activities we might want to do, what kind of practices we might want to implement. And Kat Supel and Ariel from Lansing have agreed to sort of lead this group. So after Dr. Reimers speaks, I'm going to ask Ariel and Kat to speak next. Dr. Reimers.
Joe, I don't know what else could I tell this group that I haven't told them already on global competency, which has been the focus of my conversations. But hey, look,
well, actually, can I ask you a question? Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
All right. So how do you define global competence? And what's interesting to me, the Asian Society.
Maybe you can, if you stop sharing, maybe we can see each other on the screen. Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. Even better. So basically, you know, how do you define global competence? And Asia Society, OEC Society, One World, and your definition are pretty similar. Now, I remember attending the first think tank, and you talked about the 3 A's: academic, head, affect, heart, action, hands, which is very similar to ours. Educate, ECE, educate for global awareness, connect through good character, empathy, and empower through service learning. So how do you define global competence?
I mean, yeah, no different. These days, really about helping students develop the skills to make the sustainable development goals a reality. And that involves knowing what those goals are, understanding them deeply, not being able to name them. But for example, goal number 1 is poverty. Yeah. Having the capacity to understand, why do we have poverty? Is poverty increasing or decreasing? What are the differences between communities? What causes poverty? to caring about those goals, saying this is not somebody else's business, this is my business to build a world without poverty, and actually having the skills to make a difference. So for example, to go back to the topic of climate change, as I argue in this book, the skills that what would make a person, obviously global competency includes the capacity to address climate change, but that's about a lot more than understanding the facts of climate change. It's about having the skills to both adapt to climate change, because there is already so much climate change baked into our system that even if we stopped carbon emissions today, for the next 30 years, there will continue to be climate change. So we're going to have to adapt to it. We're going to have to adapt to water rising, to storms, to all kinds of, to fires in the forest and so on. Adaptation is one set of skills. Mitigation, what can we do to mitigate the impact of these on populations? And reversal. Now, when it comes to reversal, let me give you an example of skills that illustrate that. Think about a toilet. About 10% of the population uses the toilets that most of us probably use here. These water-based toilets that basically take human waste and deposit it in sewers. But if you extended that to 100% of humanity, the impact on the planet would be disastrous. And so that means that we need to find toilets that don't require water and don't require sewage. And that's an engineering task. And so we need to educate students so they have the skills to, first of all, understand that, and eventually to come up with better toilets. Now, that example, there are some people working on that. Bill Gates has been very interested in toilets for about a decade now, and has been engaging universities and designers and others on that issue. Well, let me give you another example. How do we block some of the radiation from the sun from entering the earth? There are people right now working, placing nanoparticles on the clouds in the atmosphere, so they work as mirrors to deflect some of those rays. That is completely an engineering task. So those two competencies are absolutely global competency. Global competency requires knowledge of science, knowledge of engineering, the moral imagination to imagine a world in which we actually have overcome that challenge. And so when in my books, the books aligned with the SDGs, I talk about an interdisciplinary curriculum, that's what I'm talking about. Many people, when they think about global education, they think it's about getting the kids to recite the SDGs. It does no good to recite the SDGs. It does no good for people to chant, yeah, let's address climate change. What we need are the people with the skills to invent new businesses, new cities, new connections, new forms of work. So we actually include people in ways that are sustainable, so we address poverty and so on. So back to your question, how do I define global competency? Deep knowledge and understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals, caring about them, understanding that each one of us has a responsibility, is implicated in making that world a reality. And then skills, real skills, not the skills to talk about the issue, the skills to do about the issue. And I think that the best way we have to develop that capacity is engage children from kindergarten throughout high school, not in sporadic activities, once in a while where they do something. You know, these competitions now are popular. From time to time, we do a competition, we engage our students, they love it, we all love it. I think competitions are great, but the competition should be a complement rather than a substitute for the hard work that should be taking place every single day that a student is in a school, that engages them with some experience that is little by little building this deep capacity to be an effective and a competent global citizen. And I think that that is a task that is within reach. I don't think I'm talking about rocket science. I think many of those who convene in this gathering that you have assembled, Joe, are doing these things. And I believe that together, if we are intentional, we can do an even better job. Each one of you can challenge one another, learn from one another, and say, you know what, let's get real about building a global curriculum that produces people with those capacities.
Well, Dr. Reimers, I can't wait for June 3rd. I can't wait to see how we get real. And I'm going to give you 2 bits of feedback. The first one was one of my finest days or favorite days in all of One World was when we were in Wales and we asked the 6th graders, the 11-year-olds, what'd you learn? And the sixth grader said, I learned I got to get my skates on because we only have another 10 years to bring an end to poverty and hunger. I'd also like to invite Kat. Kat is and Ariel from Lansing, Michigan. Michigan's interesting. You can attend any school you want. So the schools have to be very competitive. And Kat and Ariel at Gartner International, their attraction, their magnet is global competence. And so Kat, can you with us? Can you say a couple of words?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, go for it.
So on the topic of global competence, of course, I can't say anything that Dr. Reimers hasn't already said so eloquently. You know, our team that's going to be talking about global competence is going to focus on the strategies and activities that we feel can pull those students from kindergarten on up through those ideals. At Gardner International, we have adopted the 2030 global goals as our curriculum for our theme. And we try to look at our countries of study and our monthly theme through those lens, so that as a school-wide, we focus on one global goal at a time. And we try to build that intentionally so that kids from kindergarten through 8th grade here are getting that messaging. And that's a strategy that is starting to really work for us. And, you know, like Dr. Reimers said, it's a short time until 2030. That means those 4th graders that we have right now, when they graduate, it's going to be 2030. And so as a world, we know we're not going to meet those deadlines, but we have to create these students that are going to be ready to address those things as they get older. They're going to be the ones that are coming up with these innovative ideas of change. And so we have to enable them now to know that they have the capacity to be those change makers.
Beautiful. Excellent, Kat. Thanks so much. So that's our second community of learning and practice is going to be global competence. We're now going to move to our third community of learning and practice. And we're fortunate here to have, I want to share my screen. We're fortunate here to have 3 leaders in this group. Can you see my screen? So we have 3 leaders in this group. Tony Devine, the Director of Global Education and Peace Foundation, Rita from Acapulco, and Madam Lin from China. So I'm going to ask Tony, because I found his name first, to speak first. Tony, I think we unmuted Tony. Yep, Tony. And no, we're not going to have any presentations, Tony. Just share with your heart, if you would, what you hope to achieve with this group.
Okay. Hi, Joe. Thanks very much.
Thank
Hope
you.
you can hear me okay. All right, cool. All right, so great honor here, great opportunity. So just coming up on the cultures of peace in the new year, let me just get to some tangibles here. We do need, you know, Dr. Reimers talked about the 4th Industrial Revolution. This is a world where we're looking at a lot of development going on, but you cannot have development until you have peace first, right? So this is where the cultures of peace is essential, right, for development to occur. So in January and February in 2022, Global Peace Foundation and our partners, including One World, we're going to acknowledge the International Day of Education, right, with a global campaign in about 10 countries around the world with the theme, Reimagining Education for Peace and Development. So this is about people learning how to get along, right, with each other beyond the differences of culture, race, religion, nationality, and so on. And it's also about building that kind of capacity, the moral and innovative leadership in our students to be able to create those peaceful communities, right, and societies. And then that they go out and collaborate with others. We talked about collaboration here, right, to come up with great solutions for the many, many pressing problems that affect our society today, so we can have that sustainable development and bring about that great prosperity. And then going into March, we have the next the next Peace Sharing Forum in 2022. We're going to be looking at, that's going to be virtual. That will be addressing similar themes, right? Like the state of education and peace building, online safety and digital citizenship. How do you build peaceful communities and strengthening youth civic engagement? So we'll let you know more about the details of these coming up in the news feeds that go out. So Joe, thank you very much.
Of course, I'm muted. Annie and Madam Lynn, we're going to ask you to speak now.
Hey.
Madam Lynn, nice to see you. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Madam Lynn. Madam Lynn's my soulmate, so I'm.
好的，那我们就不要镜头。好，Hello everyone， 我是中国南京金陵小学校长林慧敏。今天我们相聚在云端，探讨和平教育话题，这是我们教育者的社会责任。为什么要讨论反对战争、珍爱和平呢？因为在人类历史上有记载的战争达到15000余人次，直接或者间接的死亡了35亿人。战争带来了对文明的摧残，也带来了无穷的环境问题和生态灾难，还让人们流离失所，成为难民。所以战争没有真正的胜利者。
So Annie, could you translate Annie?
提出了要构建人类命运共同体。
Madam Lynn, Annie.
Yeah.
Hi.
So just pause and you translate what you said so far, please.
Okay. Dear global friends, I'm the principal of Jinling Primary School in Nanjing. Today we gather together via Zoom to talk about the topic of peace. This embodies our responsibility for education. We cherish peace. We say no to wars because over the past thousands of years, humans have suffered from more than 15,000 wars and 3.5 billion people have died. It is obviously that there's no real victor in wars.
Beautiful.
习近平主席提出要构建人类命运共同体，全世界的人们都要携起手来，共生、共存、共商、共建、共享。让我们一起呼吁，牢记历史，珍爱和平。
Chinese President Xi Jinping said we share the common fate. We need to work hand in hand. We coexist, discuss, contribute, and share.
Excellent.
1937年的12月13日，日本侵占了中国南京，屠杀了南京居民30万人，在2周。这是最黑暗的一段历史。为了牢记历史，祭奠死难同胞，从2014年开始设立了国家公祭日，开展祭奠活动。
We live in Nanjing. On December the 13th, 1937, Nanjing was occupied by Japanese army. Then Japanese army carried out a massacre that lasted 6 weeks. And so many people lost their lives. And from 2014, we set the National Memorial Day on December the 13th to memorize these people.
在本周的周五，就是12月10日，北京时间晚上9点，纽约时间早上8点，墨西哥时间早上7点，威尔士时间下午1点，我们将举行和平主题的分享会，诚挚的邀请有意愿的学校参加。那么您所在的国家和地区也有像南京大屠杀这样至黑的事件吗？您如何看待和平？请给我们分享。Thank you.
This year, we sincerely invite you to join us on the Seminar of Peace. Come and join us to contribute to create a peaceful and better future. So our seminar will be held on.
I've got it on the screen right now. Let's give Madam Lynn a round of applause. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Annie. So this is the one group where the activities are going to begin right away. And so this Friday, Jack Sakara, our eminent educators, already pulled together a lesson. And Helen, I'm hopeful we're going to create a four-country conversation. Kenya, I'd like to get Kenya involved in this. I will follow up and we'll coordinate with you. We're going to have a four-country lesson on remembering what happened in Nanjing in 1937. And for those that want to, they can participate in the Nanjing Museum ceremony. So in order to, Andy, could you mute yourself, please? Could you mute it? Andy, you got to mute yourself. Okay. So basically what we're going to do is have so this is the first organizational meeting. If you're interested in the Culture of Peace group, let us know as soon as possible. And we're going to have our first organizational meeting on Thursday. Now, again, you don't have to make every meeting, but let us know. We're going to communicate as best we can and form these groups. So, and I'm going to share comments from Rita now, I hope. Let's see. Okay. So Rita's our third Culture of Peace person. I'm not sure if bueno, Rita, yo te voy a compartir. Rita, vos tenés que encontrar a Rosy porque nos dejó sin traductor. But yo voy a leer tus palabras. So this is Rita is our third person. Acapulco, as most of you know, has real challenges of violence in its community. So basically what Rita wrote is, from a global perspective of culture of peace, we conceive it as a set of values, skills, attitudes, and actions that promote the respect of life, the dignity of people, and human rights throughout the world. Why a culture of peace? For a healthy, peaceful, and violence-free coexistence in our societies and throughout the world. Why train children and young people in a culture of peace? Because it's a fundamental aspect in education. Since by being trained in this culture, we ensure the students will be agents that promote it in any space, at any time, from the family, for the community, at the national and global level. Rita, great work there. Thank you so much. That's our Culture of Peace team. And again, it's the first meeting this Thursday. Okay, now we're going to move to universal values. We're very fortunate to have here today leading this. We got to get this gentleman up. Arthur Schwartz, leading this conversation on universal values. Arthur Schwartz, President and CEO of CART.org. Thank you. There we go. Okay, Arthur, hopefully you're enabled to speak now.
I hope that you hear my voice.
Yep.
Hello, everyone. I will be short, but I hope to inspire you. Professor Reimers said we need to begin with the end in mind. He then said he shared with us a book, Learning to Be. Learning to be. Be what? Be smart? Be wealthy? No. Learning to be good. That's what we want for all of our children, all of our students across the world. To be good people. To practice the universal values. We already today focused on so many of these values. Flexibility, vulnerability. When Professor Reimers said that Joe was being vulnerable. Resilience, caring, respect, fairness, empathy, honesty, curiosity. These are the universal values. When we talk about learning to be, that's what we want them to be. Good people who practice these universal values. So this idea of character is not adding something to your plate as teachers, as school leaders. I believe it is the plate. It is what we are trying to do when we talk about high school students who care about and practice these universal values. I would like to end by sharing with you that character is taught. We must have teachers and school people who talk about these universal values and teach them to their children from K through 12. But these values are not just taught, they have to be caught as well. Educators need to model these values every day in school. Parents have to model these values before school and after school. But not just taught and caught, but these universal values also have to be sought. We need to create schools where students want to develop their own moral compass. They are not practicing these values because they don't want to disappoint parents or disappoint their teacher. No, they are practicing these values because they know how important it is to be a person who says thank you, who shows gratitude, a person who is caring and shows empathy for those less fortunate, because this is who they want to be. This is who they want to be. So I will also share with you that if you come and join this community and learning and practice group, we will explore together how to bring these universal values, not through a program, but through everyday practice. So a teacher in a classroom, whether in China, Singapore, or Mexico, can practice these core values and teach them and model them, but most importantly, helping students own them. So it becomes the students' values that they care about, that they want to practice. I hope you will join our CULP and we can learn together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arthur. Thank you very much. So I'm going to now read what Suri works at a school in Mexico in Chimpancingo. I love the name of that school. And they apply Stephen Covey's values, start with the end in mind. And then I'm going to read to you what she's written in English. And basically, the aim of her school character education is start with the end in mind. To train leaders ready for life, prepared for the future, with competencies and skills to face the needs of today that arise in today's world. Global leaders, because we are going to create effective cultures through peace, values, and principles, which will help us form better human beings and support those who need it most. In addition to creating independence and personal commitment to reflect on their behaviors, to listen with empathy. Leadership does not exclude the good things we're already doing. It helps strengthen them and build on them to get to the next level from good to great. So Suri, thank you so much for that. And I was just gonna, again, I apologize for, again, tomorrow, the conversation starts tomorrow. I wanted to introduce you to our leaders today. And ultimately, one of the things we're gonna try and do in this group is prepare students, not for a life of tests, but the tests of life. Okay, Arthur, thank you so much.
Welcome.
And now we're going to go to the next group, which is, okay, well, the next group is Exponential Technological Change. And that's going to be Dr. Jack Sakara. Now, Jack, for those of you who don't know, created our original curriculum. Can you get Jack online here, if you would, Charlie? And liberate Jack. Jack and I are opposite ends of the political spectrum. I met Jack, who is a planetarium teacher. In fact, Jack, if you could briefly describe your background before you talk about exponential technological change. So Jack, over to you.
Sure. This is actually my 50th year in education. So 21 is kind of special to me in that way. I did 10 years in the classroom in science and history and social studies. I did 32 years as a planetarium director. I had an incredible job in a beautiful town of Portchester, New York, with a very diverse population that taught me a great deal. And well, frankly, after 9/11, I took early retirement to do work on diversity and inclusion full time, and worked closely with the Anti-Defamation League, did train the trainers for them. And some guy knocked on my door one day running for office, and lo and behold, One World was kind of born then. Janine and I have been sitting here there have been tears of joy, open sobbing, actually. That's how much One World means to us. We are looking, and we've already said it, at a time of incredible change in the world of our students and ourselves. Our students in need to adapt to the rapidity of change beyond anything that's occurred in human history. Before I go any deeper, let me just share why we went the way we did with One World. Janine started that One World Club in a school of mostly immigrant children, fourth graders, as an after-school program. And we said, let's see how this works. And she came home every week that she had the class. And she said, you know, we're having a great time. They're learning this, we're studying that, we're doing projects here, but I'm not sure they really get it. I'm not sure they really feel it. And then that January came the Haitian earthquake. And Janine got out of her car to find half her club waiting for her at the curb to say, Mrs. Sakara, there was an earthquake in Haiti. What are we going to do about it? And she said, that's when she knew she had gold. When among the poorest kids in our community say, I might not have much, I might be young, but I can do something. And they did. And look where that one school club has become. And so, yeah, there's a lot of tears of joy in my house today. We're moving from a world of linear to exponential change. We've already underlined that. But what does that mean for our children? You know, how will these transformations shape our world, shape our teaching, shape our work with young people? This is the science and technology group. And so let's start out with the simple idea that science and technology are neither good nor bad. They're tools. And like any tool, they're only as good as the hands that use them. Our children's generation are going to have ethical choices that will define the future of humanity. And so, yes, we do need to teach character, ethics, and empathy, and equality, and global competency. Absolutely. We do need to build in resilience. They're going to have to be maybe 5 careers each, reinventing themselves each time if they're going to keep pace. Together, we can work toward the SDGs. We can rebuild a fragile planet. And we do it by letting our kids go to work on issues of sustainability. And Joe's already said it early in the program, but my favorite way to say it is we teach from head to heart to hands. It's not going to be an easy chore. This particular group will wrestle with very difficult questions. So I wrote down just a few. In the 20th century, we nearly doubled the human lifespan. Have we thought about advances in genetic engineering and regenerative medicine?